No, I think as everyone kind of have realized, this is why it's so important to make sure you scored all the coffees. I mean, I'm always shocked when I see we have a production roast that average 55 points. And usually it's me starting the cupping. I will join, yeah. And then I'm like, oh, I got a mail, sorry, I'm walking away, and I saved it. And that, of course, brings down the score a lot. So make sure before you submit. This won't happen again, so don't worry. I'll get my... I mean, it feels a bit unstable right now. It feels like it's the first time we cupped, all of us. I'm sure it's not. But can we just send some love to the most stressed man in the room right now? Chris over here. I mean, isn't it amazing that potentially 70 people can cup and get the scores up in straight away? That has really helped at least us at Kaffa a lot. So thank you, Cropster, for everything you're doing. There will be time before the competition cuppings to make sure you're logged in and the app is working and everything. So don't worry about that. Be calm, have some coffee. We have a hashtag. I mean, this is a once-in-a-life event for most of us. So it would be nice to be able to go back in 20 years and look at all the pictures from Nordic Roaster Forum 2018. It's not for all the, I mean, it's also for all the people that didn't get tickets, that now are following the hashtag on Instagram to see what they are missing. Hashtag Nordic Roaster Forum 2018 in letters, not NRF. There's so many other things that's NRF, so it gets confusing. You will look back in 20 years and like, what? Did I do martial arts? I don't know. And also after someone accidentally had NRA, we got all these strange mails from the States. So Nordic Roaster Forum 2018, please. There's a storm coming. Winter is coming. Tonight. I don't know, does anyone know the name of the storm? It doesn't matter. I think it's Knud. First I thought it was Jens from Denmark coming, but it's Knud. So be careful out there if it gets bad. And does everyone have your spoon in your pocket? Yes?
No.
Hold on to it, Andreas.
Oh, he's out.
You're paying, so that's okay. Andreas is the only one that's allowed to use the spoon. Okay, then we know exactly how an 83.09 point coffee tastes, right? The question is, how do we get that 83.09 point coffee through the production and through the roaster in the best way? Chris, welcome back. I have a microphone for you. Yeah, now we're starting. This is it.
Okay.
We have prepared.
Take your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris Cropster, which one?
You have that? Perfect. That's it again.
Yeah.
What's the name?
Send it to me.
More or less.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay, great. All right. This is really the last time, aside from the support stuff, I'm not going to be talking more than I've had a great introduction. So the topic is sustainability. I'm going to preface this. So my background in coffee started about 20 years ago. I worked in a variety of coffee companies, either a outside quality lab, did outside quality testing and quality control, product development, and at the time there weren't the resources that the industry has now in terms of Q graders, so we were like the panel that people sent coffee to, that farmers started doing experimentation with. We did a lot of work with small companies that were growing, small companies that were just starting out, large companies that were growing, large companies that were shrinking, a variety of them. When I started putting this together, though, I realized that all of my work experience, I started with Cropster, I mentioned about 6 months ago, that I can't really put up live, well, not live, but I can't put up real representations of some of the scenarios I wanted to pick, because a lot of it was starting a new company, or not starting a new company, but starting employment at a new company, or working with a coffee roaster that I was consulting with, and reviewing what they do, and making sure that what they do makes sense, and that it kind of creates a foundation they can grow like a stronger company with, kind of reducing complexities, making sure that everything that is in place actually needs to be in place and serves a purpose. And that, to me, that's sustainability in a different sense. But I can't put any pictures up because they're not, this is like to protect the innocent. The companies I work for aren't necessarily interested in my showing a plant before and after and showing improvements. So these are going to be somewhat generic photos. Sorry about that. And then the other thing is, again, 20 years ago I started with coffee, very passionate about coffee. I got into it because I loved it. I still do. But I have realized that over the years I became someone who starts using words like process and product to refer to coffee roasting and coffee grinding and product that is coffee. So I've worked a little bit too much with engineers, so forgive me for that. The idea, the more or less, I've seen a couple, the statement of less is more, and then I saw a recent article about more is less, meaning in terms of data, and working for a company that does collect data, there's really a balance between too much. You can really overload yourself with data, and it's not just data, but it's also like processes. It's about adding complexity in areas that don't necessarily need to be there. So to me, that's what I'll be addressing in terms of sustainability. Is not what typically people think about as agricultural sustainability or energy, like renewable energy. Those are hot topics, and actually I guess the whole sustainability of the coffee industry is under question right now with the C market where it is, but that's another topic, maybe over beers. So for me, sustainability is really not about necessarily the agricultural aspect of it or the energy aspect of it. It's by being very efficient, being very thoughtful when you're deliberate, when you're putting things in place, when you're doing evaluations, making decisions, and less about any kind of actual certification or any kind of wind-powered energy in your plant. Again, going back to some of my background, I worked in a very large company, actually two, and we went through about 1.5 years of this kind of analysis that we tried to determine what was what does sustainable mean, and it means something to like the finance, to marketing, to sales, to being able to show a picture of the people you buy the coffee from and that they are receiving education and reasonable income. All these metrics are really nice, but they become quite complex. And what I found in that company is that we had a tremendous metric for trying to evaluate what would be the best way to determine what sustainable is. And we cross-referenced different existing certifications to try and understand which one was more compatible with the type of product that we sold. And ultimately, the internal complexities that we had a very small target audience. We didn't really have good products. We had extreme amount of complexities in our processing. So all of the kind of the facade of sustainability and how we wanted to market it, and sometimes it's a lot of romance language. But what we didn't have internally was an efficient way to roast coffee, to buy coffee, to manage our inventory, to make sure that we had the coffee that, or the products that we wanted to sell to people. And again, speaking to what's sustainable, and to me, it's having more of a minimal approach to what you're doing and what you're selling. The review and critique. So again, I've started either as a consultant or working directly for coffee companies. And what I find, this one in particular, I started with a coffee roaster that had somewhere between, I think it was 60 or 70 different what I call green types, like different specific coffee origins that were roasted and either pre-roast blended or post-roast blended. A lot of complexity there. It was manual, so everything was hand weighed. We had a tremendous amount of green types, and we didn't have good inventory management for it. So the complexity that we had in terms of, we'd run out of a couple of bags of the Yemen and we had to go get that. Then we ran out of a couple of bags of the coffee that we carried for, you know, a particular blend, very isolated, low volume blend. And I just looked at the complexity that we had, the challenges of sourcing small volume of coffee for a company that really doesn't benefit from doing that. So we went through and just we call it rationalization. I get to it later. Go through, it's like looking at a spice rack and just determining, like, do we have too much? Have we gone overboard in our sourcing? Sometimes when the coffee's on the table, you just want to buy it, but you may not have a good place for it, and you're buying it hoping that it can work somewhere, and then I think this just went out. Can you hear me? Either way.
It was really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Yep, are we back up? All right. Cool, thank you. So the idea is, like, depending on some of the companies here I know and are well established, other people might be just starting off. It's a constant effort, and there's actually, in my learning with larger companies, there are people assigned to reviewing what you do, and just it's called continuous improvement. You're just constantly looking for ways to make things simpler and eliminate unnecessary steps and unnecessary critiques or analysis that you do, and simplify it. So one of the positions that I had when I started at Intelligentsia in 2008 was to review the complexity that we had. We believed, or the belief was, that we were developing roast profiles that were extremely complex. Each of the roasters had individual, say, dialects. They roasted coffee differently from one another. The same coffee would be roasted differently between different roasters, and depending on kind of feel and how they perceived something at a cupping table later on as compared to another thing at a cupping table later on. And a lot of the decisions just weren't grounded in data. They weren't grounded in fact. They were more gut feel, or I feel like this coffee cupped better at this point in time, therefore the roast profile will get established as this. And my challenge when I went in there was to methodically break down the roast process into the fundamental components, and then restructure the roasting profiles, the airflow settings, the gas settings, and then the cupping protocol, so that we could do a very methodical, scientific process of evaluating do we have too much complexity in our roast profiles, and do we have too much variation from roaster to roaster? Do we have things defined well? Are they cupping in a way that is meaningful for finished product evaluation? The rationalized activities and complexities. Again, I saw an article recently. It's not to target anyone. I guess I don't remember the company's name, but the person who the article was about hand sorted each of the coffees that came in, and it's an awesome idea, but it's not sustainable. Like, it's not a practice that could actually continue to. You can't grow a business and hand sort coffee. my initial thought is that's crazy. But then I started thinking about like you can take that approach and basically outsource it. You can buy cleaner coffee. If your coffee needs to be hand sorted, or if you're inclined to hand sort coffee, there might be some justification for buying different grade of coffee. You can actually create specifications and make sure that the coffee you buy actually meets the specifications. Two of the companies that I worked for, we actually did the green cleaning and blending outside of the warehouse, where you don't add value. I know that's not an option for a lot of people, but again, it's taking this kind of activity of hand sorting coffee and the possibility of actually growing a company doing this kind of activity it's really not something that's rational. So whenever I start a new company, whenever I look at as a consultant, coming in and looking at companies' activities, it's always like, where does the value get added in this? Are we doing something that we could do a little simpler and still gain the same product out of? Does the roast profile need to be this complex? So one thing that really speaks to me is the data collection. And I don't know if you guys read an article recently in Roast, but it's about data collection and how to leverage data just throughout your roasting process, your buying process. And the idea being that there's a lot of people, I feel like now the proliferation of data, you can data log almost anything. Publications are around. There's a lot of people that have opinions about roasting, opinions about impact of water activity on roasting parameters, or whether or not you should track modulation in roasting. There's a lot of different theories. When I say grow up in coffee, there wasn't a lot of information available. There are a few people that had a lot of information. We would talk to them, but now with just the access to data online, and I feel like a lot of unchecked resources or sources. A lot of people have an idea. They have kind of a low sample set, we'll say. They've made some kind of wide sweeping generalization about a few incidences, and then they prove that to be the case. Or it could be good information, but it's out of context, so something that's relevant to a drum roaster with one type of burner might not be relevant. I worked a lot on thermalos. Thermalos just dump a lot of forced heat into a drum versus a burner coming from underneath. So a lot of the information that's actually been presented or discussed, or I think some of the theories in roasting, it's situational. And I would always encourage anyone who's doing any kind of, especially if you're going to start chasing after a particular roasting theory, that you make sure that it's applicable to your business, that you make sure that it's applicable to your roaster, to your type of whatever temperature device, if it's RTD or thermocouple, your batch sizes, whatever it be, to collect the data yourself or challenge the data that's been presented. That's a lot of my role in the larger companies, is to take my coffee knowledge and kind of challenge some of the activities that existed in the larger companies. So for me, data is, I really don't trust people's data. Even if I read something interesting, luckily I've had a lot of analytical equipment at my disposal, but I always challenge like these kind of ideas that something needs to be this way, or this is the only way to get blank is to do blank. And I personally always put that to the test, and I never make any changes within our roast profiles or the blends that we develop or the coffees that we buy based on other people's information. I always validate it. And I would encourage, not everyone has analytical equipment that can do that, but check resources, check publications. Science Direct, I think, has free downloads, so you can always do that. So yeah, data. I just encourage people to have checked sources whenever you find information. There is a lot of good information, I'll say that, and I'm not challenging the information. I always take information and put it to the test and make sure that it actually works, and it works in the context that I'm working in. there's an 80-20 rule. This I've applied to a couple of companies that I've worked for. The lab that I mentioned, we had 130 customers. 2 customers in particular were responsible for about 70% of our work, and then we had the 20 that were just they just drained. They were like the friends that drained your energy and required the most effort. And I always, like, periodically you just go back and review and say, like, as people who roast coffee for customers, you start to kind of create a persona of either the customers that require a lot of special attention, or products that are really challenging to produce. A lot of times in the larger companies, you can eliminate SKUs or eliminate products that just, it's a lot of effort to have just a very small amount of volume. And it's one of those things in the review and Rationale